There is just one component left to test. That is the expense list filters component. And once we're done, we'll be able to move on to the next section and actually deploy our app to production. So that component up above, expense list filters, it's really not a bad one. There are a few things inside of here we're going to be tweaking. We have some inline functions, and we're also not using map dispatch to props, but we are going to integrate all of that. And we're also going to look at how we can create more fixtures. We need some fixtures for the filters, since we're going to need some test filter data to get this component tested. I am going to go ahead and close down all of the other files we have open except for expense list filters. And I'm also going to create the test file for this one. In the components folder, expense list filters.test.js. Inside of here, we're going to write a few test cases, maybe 5 or 6, allowing us to make sure this component is always working as expected. Before we do though, let's go ahead and do a little bit of refactoring over here. Now we already have a class-based component because we happen to use state, but I do want to take things a step further, breaking out some of those inline functions and adding map dispatch to props. Down below, I'm going to kick that process off by taking this onChange handler and moving that out. So I'll define that up above instead. I can do something like on text change. I can set that equal to the arrow function from down below. So I can just take it, cut it out, paste it up above, save things, and then just reference it right here. So that would be this dot on text change. Perfect. So that one's done, and I'm just going to do that for the one other inline function we have. This is for the select onChange handler. I can create that up above the method on sort change. I can set it equal to the arrow function from down below. I'm just going to cut it and reference this dot on sort change. Now up above, we can just paste the code in that we cut out and we're all done. So all of the inline functions have been broken out into methods. And the last thing I want to do before we write any test cases is break out all of those dispatch calls as well. We're going to be setting up map dispatch to props down below, just like we did in the past. So const map dispatch to props. We're going to go ahead and set this up to take in exactly what we might expect. We are going to take in the dispatch argument, and we are going to implicitly return an object. While we're here, we can also tweak the above. We can implicitly return this object as opposed to explicitly returning it. Very good. And now we're going to go ahead and actually pass something into this object. What are we going to define? Well, we're actually going to be defining 5 things. So what do we have? We have a way to change the sort. There are 2 of those. We have a way to change the date. There are 2 of those as well. And finally, we have a way to change the text, just 1 of those, for a total of 5 things that we want to get into the component. First up would be set text filter. Here, we do need to create the function that does take an argument in, the text filter you're trying to set. Then we go ahead and set up the arrow function where we implicitly return whatever comes back from dispatch. And in this case, we are going to dispatch the set text filter action. So I'm going to call the action generator and pass the text in. Next up, we can do the sort bys. So we have sort by date. We can do that first. This one doesn't take any arguments. All we have to do is dispatch sort by date. And we can also knock out sort by amount, which is very similar. No need for any arguments. We're just going to create a sort by amount prop. We're going to have it be this arrow function. This arrow function is going to call the correct dispatch. Next up, we just have 2 more. We have set start date and set end date. Set start date. This one does take in a value. We can call that start date or anything we like. And we just need to pass that value through to the action generator. I'm going to call dispatch. Then I'm going to call the action generator, set start date. Perfect. Now, what do we need to do from here? We do have to pass start date in. Last up would be the set end date prop, set end date. This is very similar to the one above. We are going to get an end date. We need to go ahead and pass that through. I am going to dispatch a call, and then in here, we are going to call set end date, the action generator, passing the end date that was provided. Perfect. So now we have all of the map dispatch to props set up, and we can actually provide that as the second argument to connect. Map dispatch to props. Once we do have that set up, we can take a quick moment to tweak all of the code up above that actually uses dispatch. So instead of using this.props.dispatch, I'm going to use this.props.setStartDate, removing the closing parenthesis, as well as the dispatch and the opening parenthesis for all 5. We have the same thing down below for set text filter. And then we have 2 down here for sort by date, which is first, and sort by amount, which comes up second. Perfect. So there we have it. We now have everything refactored over here. The expense list filters file is ready to be completely tested, and we're going to knock that process out, starting over in expense list filters. Now we can grab those usual imports, importing React from React, also importing the named export shallow from Enzyme. And we are also going to be importing the named export, the unconnected version. So I am going to export this guy, expense list filters. Now we can go ahead and grab that, importing the named export expense list filters. And I'm going to grab that from the correct location. I have to go up 2 folders to get to the source directory into the components folder. In there, we have the file ExpenseListFilters.js. So once we have all of these in place, we can kick things off by starting the very basic snapshot tests. So let's just go ahead and get this component rendered, and we are going to pass in the information it expects. So we expect that filters property, we have text, we have sort by, we have our start date, we have our end date. So we want to create some fixture data that's going to allow us to actually pass data down. So I am going to make another fixtures file over inside of the tests fixtures folder down below. I can make a new file for filters. This is going to be filters.js. And what goes inside of here is going to be very similar to what went inside of expenses. We're just going to export some stuff. We're going to export some test data. I am going to import moment since we are going to need that. Import moment from moment. And then we're going to choose to export 2 different sets of filters. I'm going to have one where we use the default values. Then I'll use one where we have some actual things set up. So let's go ahead and knock that out. I'm going to create a const for filters. I can then go ahead and set this up equal to an object, very similar to our filters object. So I might start with text equal to an empty string. I can use a sort by value of date, and I will have start date and end date both at undefined. So let me set both of those up. End date, undefined. Now this is just one of the things we're going to export. I'm also going to take this and copy it down below and export something else like alt filters, or you can call it wherever you like. And these are going to be some filters where the data is populated, so we can make sure that both cases work. Right here, I'm going to type something in. Maybe I'm searching for all expenses with bills somewhere in the text. Let's say I'm going to sort by the amount, and let's say I also have a start date and an end date defined. So right here, I can create a moment instance at a specific point in time. Let's go ahead and use 0. Then down below, I can make a moment instance. I'll start it at 0, and I'll go ahead and add 3 days by calling add, passing in the number of things I'm trying to add and the unit that I'm referring to. So now that we have both of these things set up, we have some pretty good dummy data, and we can just export them. I'm going to export all in one shot, filters and alt filters. And if you remember, this is all part of the export syntax we explored much earlier in the course. This is just a shorthand way to export 2 things at the same time. So now that we have both of our named exports in place, we can actually go ahead and import them and then go ahead and set up some snapshot tests. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to import filters and alt filters. I'm going to grab them from the fixtures file, up a folder, inside of fixtures. In there, we have our filters file. But now let's create some of the variables we're going to need for those spies. There are quite a few. We can use let. First up, we have set text filter. Then we're going to go ahead and move into the sorts. We have sort by date. We also have sort by amount. And then we wrap things up with our set date ones. We have set start date. And we also have set end date. Perfect. So once we have all of those in place, we can move on to the next thing that we're going to do, which is to define before each. So inside of before each, as always, we want to make sure to initialize those values. So every single test case has access not only to them, but to a fresh version of them. So right here, we are going to reference all of those variables, calling jest.fn for each. Set text filter can be first equals jest.fn. I can just go ahead and copy this part, or actually I'm just going to take this line and duplicate it. Next up, we got sort by date. Then we have sort by amount. Then I will do set start date and I'll wrap things up with set end date. Now we can also set up the wrapper itself. So up above, I can create the wrapper variable. And down below, I can actually create an instance of the component. So setting wrapper equal to, I'm going to use shallow. I'm going to shallow render in JSX, the expense list filters component. And I am going to make sure to pass all of those things down. So how are we going to get that done? I'm just going to break this out onto its own line. And right here, I'll pass down all of the props. I'm going to start with filters, setting that equal to filters. Then I'm going to go ahead and use set text filter. I can copy that and paste it right in. Next up, we are going to have sort by date, setting it equal to the sort by date variable from up above. And then we just have a few more. So we will go with sort by amount. 2 more, set start date. Right here, set start date. And finally, set end date. So I know this is a little bit of overhead to get things up and running, but if we are going to be adding a few test cases, setting this stuff up is definitely worth it. Instead of doing this over and over again in each of the individual tests, we just do it one time. Now we can use wrapper down below in our test cases. We have this nice baseline wrapper that we can start from. Now our goal is to create 2 test cases for the moment. We're going to make one for a snapshot when filters is rendered. We already have that. And we're going to make another for when alt filters is rendered. And it's not quite clear how we're going to do that, but we'll talk about that in just a second. For now, let's go ahead and knock out the easy test case. So I will test, and I'll use something like should render expense list filters correctly. And inside of here, we're not going to do anything earth-shattering. We're going to go through the process we've gone through many times before where we expect something about the wrapper, and all we're going to do is use to match snapshot. Now this is perfectly fine. It is a great step in the right direction. If we do save things and check out the test suite, we should see a passing test suite with one new snapshot. And now we can take a look at that snapshot over in the expense list filters snapshot file. Right here we have our test case name. We have an empty value, a select dropdown value of date, which is correct. And down below for end date, we have null, which is great. And way down at the bottom for start date, we should have null as well. So we know that things are rendering correctly for that default filters, but what about the alt filters? How exactly do we change the props for one of the components that we're testing? Well, to demonstrate this, let's start with the test case. I'm going to go ahead and take this test case and copy it down below. And all we're going to do is change the title. Should render expense list filters with alt data correctly. Now the goal right here is to actually change the props, and lucky for us, Enzyme gives us a way to get this done. If we head over to the documentation for Enzyme, we can take a quick peek at this. Inside of the list of expenses, we're looking for set props. Set props is kind of similar to how set state works with React components, though set props is from Enzyme, and it's something we only have access to in our Enzyme tests. Using set props, we can manipulate the props for a given component and then assert something about it. So this is going to help us, and if we look at how it gets used, we just pass an object into set props and we define the new props. So down below, for example, right here, they use set props and they set a new prop for name. They give the new value bar. We're going to be doing that exact same thing. So I'm going to switch over to the terminal, back over to our code, and all we're going to do is use wrapper dot set props. We are going to pass in our object. Now, what are we looking to do? We're looking to update the filters prop. For this test case, we do not want to use the regular filters. We're going to use the alt filters. So I'm going to set it equal to alt filters, which we imported up above. Now, if we go ahead and save this, we should have another new snapshot showing up in the test suite. We do. And if we look at that, we should see the values showing up. So right here we are. This is the test case. We have bills. We have amount for select, and down below for the date range picker, we do have a valid end date, and way down at the bottom, we do have a valid start date. So when we are testing, we have a lot more control over things than when we're building applications. So with Enzyme, we're able to set props, and that's going to allow us to use this one setup for all of our test cases. Now that we have this in place, we're going to move on to the next and final video where we're just going to continue building out the test cases necessary for this one. I'm excited to get to that, so stay tuned. I'll see you then.